The Sand Cave Tragedy. In the dead of winter on January 30th, 1925, a man named Floyd Collins crawled deep into the earth through a narrow limestone passage known as Sand Cave in Kentucky. He was searching for something more than just adventure. He was chasing a dream of discovery, fame, and fortune. But just 55 feet below the surface, that dream turned into a living nightmare. A falling rock pinned his leg, trapping him underground in a space so tight he couldn't sit up or turn around. For the next 2 weeks, the world watched helplessly as rescuers tried to save him. Crowds gathered, reporters camped at the cave entrance, and day after day, the situation grew more desperate. This is the fatal breakdown of the Sand Cave tragedy. The story of Floyd Collins, the man who was buried alive while the nation listened. Floyd Collins wasn't just a caver, he was a pioneer. Born in 1887 in rural Kentucky, he grew up exploring the complex maze of underground passages that made up the Mammoth Cave System, one of the largest cave networks in the world. Caving was in his blood, but for Floyd it was also a business. At the time, cave tourism was booming in Kentucky. Entrepreneurs were buying land, digging entrances, and charging visitors to explore the underground. Floyd had already discovered Crystal Cave years earlier, but it had failed to attract enough tourists, so he kept searching, believing that somewhere under the hills he would find a tunnel or chamber big enough to turn into a tourist gold mine. On January 30th, he entered Sand Cave alone, carrying a single kerosene lantern and a pocketful of food. But he would never make it back out. The entrance to Sand Cave was already known to local cavers, but it hadn't been fully explored. Floyd believed it could be the missing link, an undiscovered section that would finally bring visitors to his land. He descended alone, crawling through tight spaces just wide enough for his shoulders. The passage twisted and dipped steeply, coated in loose sandstone and damp limestone. About 150 feet into the cave, Floyd squeezed through a narrow chute and reached a small chamber. It wasn't the breakthrough he had hoped for, but it was promising. As he turned to leave, disaster struck. While crawling back through a tunnel only 12 inches high and 18 inches wide, Floyd's left leg triggered a loose rock overhead. The boulder, estimated at nearly 30 pounds, slipped, landed on his left leg, and wedged it against the cave wall. He was pinned, stuck flat on his back in complete darkness, with one leg crushed and the weight in the earth pressing down on him. He tried to move, he tried to shift the rock, but the walls were too tight. There was no leverage, no way to reposition, no way to crawl back. Floyd was alone, cold, and now completely trapped. It wasn't until the following morning that anyone realized something had gone wrong. When he didn't return, his younger brother Homer and a few locals entered the cave. After crawling for nearly an hour, they reached the chamber where Floyd lay wedged. He was alive, barely. And thus began one of the most drawn-out and heartbreaking rescue attempts in American history. Word of the trapped man spread fast. By February 1st, local newspapers had already picked up a story. Within days, reporters, photographers, and spectators flooded the rural Kentucky landscape. Tents were pitched, fires lit, and a small town formed around the mouth of Sand Cave. What began as a local rescue effort had become a full-blown media spectacle. Rescuers worked around the clock, crawling into the narrow tunnel with supplies, blankets, hot coffee, food in jars, and warm words from loved ones. Homer Collins, Floyd's brother, became a national figure almost overnight. He stayed near the entrance day and night, praying, helping direct the rescue, and even crawling in himself several times to speak to Floyd directly. Floyd was trapped in a terrifying position, unable to sit up, unable to roll over. The only way to reach him was by crawling through a winding shaft filled with falling rocks, dripping water, and stale air. Each trip in was a challenge. Rescuers brought him small meals and tried to dig around the rock pinning his leg, but the space was so tight they could barely swing a tool. The conditions were brutal. The cave floor was freezing, the walls leaked water, and the more time passed, the more unstable the tunnel became. On February 4th, they collapsed, sealed off the entrance. Tons of rock began to fall. The original rescue shaft was now completely blocked. Floyd was still alive, but no one could reach him. So engineers came up with a desperate new plan. dig a vertical shaft directly above where Floyd lay. A crew of miners, laborers, and volunteers began digging through the hill. They worked non-stop in bitter cold and through solid rock, trying to reach him before it was too late. But every hour that passed made survival less likely. The digging was frantic, working in shifts around the clock. Rescuers used picked axes, shovels, pneumatic drills to dig a 55-foot vertical shaft directly above Floyd's position. The cold bit into their hands, and the mud turned to sludge beneath their boots. Spectators gathered in silence as steam rose from the workers' backs. Time was running out. All the while, Floyd remained conscious, at least during the first few days. According to Homer and the few rescuers who reached him before the collapse, Floyd stayed hopeful. He spoke about the plans for the cave. He asked for a pencil and paper. He told his brother, "I'm fine, just get me out." His voice grew weaker by the day, but he was still fighting. But after February 5th, there was no more first-hand accounts. No one had been able to reach him since the tunnel collapsed. They had no way to check his pulse, offer warmth, or even call his name. As the vertical shaft neared completion, tension in the camp reached the breaking point. On February 16th, 17 days after Floyd became trapped, rescuers finally broke through to the chamber. It was too late. Floyd Collins was dead. His body was cold. The scene made it clear. He had likely died days earlier, alone, with his legs still pinned and the world above unable to help. The official cause was exposure, compounded by starvation and dehydration. He had survived for nearly 4 days after the tunnel collapsed, and then, quietly, he had slipped away. But even in death, Floyd's story wasn't over. Once Floyd's body was discovered, the tragedy took a disturbing turn. The tunnel was still too narrow and unstable to remove him safely. Engineers feared another collapse, so again, the unthinkable decision was made. Floyd would remain in the cave, for now. Instead, they sealed the tunnel, covered the entrance, and held a memorial on site. The crowds had grown into the thousands. Reporters, ministers, families with children, all had come to witness what had become the most widely publicized cave rescue in history. The press dubbed him the greatest cave explorer ever known. But beneath the headlines was a far more human story. A man who had hoped for fame and found it in the most tragic way possible. 3 months later, in a move that shocked the public, a group of businessmen retrieved Floyd's body, not for burial, but to display it. They had bought Crystal Cave from his family, turned it into a tourist attraction, and placed Floyd's embalmed body inside a glass-topped coffin at the entrance. Tourists paid to see him. For years, his remains were part of the exhibits until 1929, when vandals broke in, stole the body, and dumped it in a ravine nearby. He was later rediscovered and reburied in a hidden chamber within the cave, where he remains to this day. The Sand Cave tragedy changed the way America thought about exploration, rescue, and media. It was one of the first events covered live by radio. Reporters interviewed rescuers on the scene. Photos of the camp ran on front page across the country. People wrote letters, sent money, prayed from afar. For 17 days, Floyd Collins became a household name. And yet, what lingers most is not the media storm, but the quiet cruelty of the earth itself. A man trapped just 55 feet from freedom. A rescue that came too late. And a nation that, for the first time, truly understood what it meant to be buried alive. That is the story of the Sand Cave tragedy.